Live from the European Parliament in Strasbourg, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us this evening, and this is what we have on the program for you. No confidence. For coverage as UK Prime Minister Theresa May fights for survival in Parliament tonight. Historic humiliation, the worst defeat ever for a sitting government in the UK, plus all the reaction, including benched Brexit. What that overwhelming no vote means for the UK's departure and Europe's negotiating position. Election impact, MEPs voice their concerns about the upcoming vote in the long shadow of Brexit, and catastrophe cash-in. The company's cashing in on fears of a no-deal Brexit chaos. Now, less than 24 hours after a historic and humiliating defeat, tonight the British Prime Minister Theresa May could face another one, and the stakes could not be higher for her. In about 2 hours from now, British MPs will cast their votes on a no-confidence motion tabled last night by Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. That's just moments after Theresa May's Brexit agreement suffered an overwhelming defeat. All right, now we have a lot of analysis for you. Let's go to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, joining us live now. Darren, so, you know, the MPs have been debating this no-confidence vote. Tell us, bring us up to speed on what's happening there.
Well, as you say, they've been debating this no-confidence vote for, the last 4 or 5 hours, Tessa. We are expecting a result in the next couple of hours. And a bit like last night, we think we already know the result, and that is that Theresa May is likely to survive, despite Jeremy Corbyn saying that it is a zombie government and that a general election should be on the cards. But given the fact that particularly the Northern Irish MPs, the DUP, are likely to continue to back the Conservative government, she is likely to win that vote. It will be close, but she will remain in power. But be in no doubt, Labour's strategy on this seems to be that they will continue having these votes of no confidence. They feel that at certain pressure points over the next couple of weeks, they could at some stage topple the government. But let's first have a listen in to some of the debate as it's been carrying on this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, this government cannot govern and cannot command the support of Parliament on the most important issue facing our country. Every single previous Prime Minister in this situation would have resigned and called an election. It is the duty of this House to show the lead where this government has failed and pass a motion of no confidence so that the people of this country can decide who their MPs are and who their government is and who will deal with the crucial issues facing the people of this country. I commend my motion to the House.
Last night, the House rejected the deal the government has negotiated with the European Union. Today, it is asked a simpler question. Should the next step be a general election? I believe that is the worst thing we could do. It would deepen division when we need unity. It would bring chaos when we need certainty. And it would bring delay when we need to move forward. So I believe this House should reject this motion.
Doesn't she realise, in all honesty now, that the time has come for her to show some flexibility on those red lines and get us into a genuine discussion rather than just repeating the lines to take that we've heard for the last 5 months ad nauseum?
The problem is the Prime Minister seems to be talking as if she'd lost by 30 votes yesterday, not 230. Her refusal to even consider changing any of her red lines when the EU and Irish government and others have made clear that the deal she got was dependent on those red lines is making this impossible.
Mr. Speaker, the choice is clear. The United Kingdom is on a path to self-destruction. Without a change of course, Brexit will see our economy smaller, weaker, poorer.
So we will support the government tonight, this evening, on this motion, so that the Prime Minister has more time and has the space to focus now on acting in the national interest on Brexit.
A pretty lively debate there inside the UK Houses of Parliament, but as I say, we are expecting the results to be what we think it is, which is that the government will survive. Let's bring in two different MPs from two different parties. First of all, let's talk to Owen Smith, who's a Labour MP. Owen, can you just explain to us, what is this Labour strategy of holding a vote of confidence in the government when even your own MPs recognise you're not going to win it?
Well, it's not really the morally right thing to do, given the record of this government. It's the only thing any self-respecting opposition could do when a government of any stripe loses by such a gargantuan proportion as the Prime Minister did yesterday. You'd expect us to submit no confidence in the government. Nobody imagined, frankly, even in the wildest projections, that the Tories were going to lose the vote yesterday evening by 230. I mean, it's a historic vote by any proportions, and therefore the right thing for Labour to do is say they've lost the confidence of the House. We should test that today. No,
the interesting thing, of course, is that I think you probably went through the same division lobby last night, but you're on very different spectrum when it comes to Brexit.
Different reasons.
For different reasons, that's right. But you both can't win this, so do you think a second referendum is now more likely because of last night?
Yes, without a doubt. I think there is growing understanding that Parliament is deadlocked, and the only way out of this impasse, in my view, is to put this decision back to the British people, and I think that day is coming closer every day.
Now, Owen, you voted for very different reasons. Do you think that last night helped increase the potential for no deal, which is what you've been advocating?
Well, at the moment, we are heading to leave at 11 o'clock on the night of the 29th of March. That's the law of the land, and that would honour the promise to the 17.4 million people that if they voted leave, we would actually leave. What we have in the UK is a constitutional conundrum which has never come up, which we've had referendums in the past. We had one on the European Community in 1975, we had one on Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, AV. Every time the people obediently and helpfully went along with what the establishment wanted. This time, to the horror of the establishment, as you saw with the chaotic position we've now got in the Commons, which is very much a Remain establishment institution at the moment, sadly, there's a real conundrum. How are those Remain MPs going to deliver what the 17.4 million people voted for? And they were promised, this wasn't this wasn't an opinion poll. They were told, you are sovereign, we will give you the power, you decide.
But there's increased talk today from cabinet ministers that actually the one way out of this is a customs union. Is Britain staying inside the customs union, because there is probably support in that place for that. Is that acceptable to you?
No, because after the referendum, the Conservative Party defined leave to mean leave the single market, leave the customs union specifically, and leave the remit of the European Court of Justice. And this agreement absolutely does not deliver that. And that's very much why I voted against it. It's a thoroughly bad agreement all round, apart from the horrors of the Irish backstop, in which you created an entirely new political entity called UK brackets NI, which carves off Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK, and resulted in Herr Selmayr rather unwisely boasting in a smaller provincial paper, the Passauer Neue Presse, that the EU had won everything it wanted and the UK had to pay the price of, quote, losing Northern Ireland, which is an extraordinary thing to say.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. We, as I say, two different MPs on very two different ends of the spectrum. We're in the same division lobby last night, and the question, of course, is that both of them can't win in this process, and it will be interesting to see over the next coming weeks whether Britain is heading towards a no deal on the 29th of March, or whether there is potentially a deal or indeed a second referendum. But that is the conundrum, of course, that Theresa May faces. The government and indeed this country, the Parliament cannot at the moment make its mind up on what type of Brexit it wants.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Darren McCaffrey and his guests. And here joining me in the studio to talk about all of this is Mary Honeyball. She is a British Labour MEP with the Socialists and Democrats group in Parliament. And Nathan Gill. He is an independent British MEP with the Europe, Freedom and Direct Democracy group. All right, Mary, I'll start with you. I'll ask you the same question. Do you think Theresa May can survive this vote tonight?
Theresa May has had an absolutely astonishing ability to just keep going. I have never in a long political career come across anything like it. So I think she probably will. She lost yesterday by an unprecedented amount. There's never actually been a vote the Prime Minister has lost ever by that amount, 230 votes against her. Yeah. She's now facing the vote of confidence, and I think you're right saying she'll probably survive that, which means she will probably survive. Yeah. She doesn't look as if she's a Prime Minister going anywhere, but what I do think she needs to do is to show a bit of leadership and not just keep going on in the same way, trying to get something which she has failed to deliver for nearly 2 years. Something has to give here.
I mean, I think what's interesting, and Nathan, so if she survives this, in fact, that's the sense that we're getting, isn't it, it looks like a turn after the defeat last night. If people are rallying behind her now because they don't want to see a chaotic election, or perhaps Jeremy Corbyn at the helm, you know, the other possibilities. Did it strengthen her hand, in fact, to come back to Europe? Because now she's got the support.
No, I wouldn't say it strengthened her hand at all. I think she's what you say a term, a dead man walking. I mean, she literally is going nowhere. She's been barking up the wrong tree for the last 2 years.
But people want her to continue on. I mean,
people don't want her to continue on. The Conservative MPs will rally behind her because they're afraid of an election.
Right.
But we're not, and neither are Labour. You know, if it comes to it, let's have a general election, because quite frankly, they are not delivering what the people required, what the people thought that they were voting for. They are not fit for purpose, to use a term that they like to use themselves a lot, and quite frankly, she should get out of the way. And they were absolutely right. If she had anything about her whatsoever, she would have resigned at lunchtime today.
But, you know, even Mary, you think that she is going to survive. Did Jeremy Corbyn just squander an opportunity here, considering she might survive this?
Well, she might survive it. Jeremy Corbyn, as we know, wants a general election, which is obviously one option. I mean, the thing about the House of Commons at the moment is that it's in complete disarray, and there is no real consensus about where we go from here. My own view would actually be another referendum, because I think people now know...
Is that what Jeremy Corbyn wants?
Not really. No.
Now you're saying it.
No, but we now know what Brexit looks like. This is absolutely the best deal that we can get, or Theresa May can get, given her red lines. And unless she changes those, which it doesn't look as if she will, even if she does change them, I think we need to put it back to the people, because it's very, very different. The situation has completely changed from 2016.
But Mary, nobody was asked to vote on a deal. Nobody was asked to vote. Should Britain leave with a deal? Should Britain remain in the EU and adopt the EU army and all these other things? It was simple. It was leave or remain.
Yes, but people didn't know. People didn't know what leave meant. They really didn't.
It meant leave. It's pretty easy.
No, it's not, because there are various ways of leaving. You don't just leave anything. You leave under certain conditions. And that's what people didn't know. They didn't know what any agreement with the EU would look like. And so it's only right, it's only democratic and legitimate now to put this back to the British people and say, you now know what this looks like. You can have another vote on it to make up your minds about it.
But as Brexiteers, what we have seen is a Remain Prime Minister, a Remain government and a Remain Parliament negotiate a deal. This is the best deal that Remainers can
But you don't acknowledge that people didn't know, like what Mary was saying, that people didn't know what they were voting on at that time.
I was at the forefront of the campaign in Wales during 2016. Believe you me, we were argued on every single level about all different facets. People faced Project Fear. They were told we were going to go over a cliff edge. President Obama came over and told us, for heaven's sake, you'll be at the back of the queue. People didn't care about that. They wanted their sovereignty back. That's what they wanted.
They wanted a whole lot of things, and a lot of the Brexit result was a reflection of people's lives and the fact that they'd been living under austerity for very many years. People were left behind, people were fed up, and it was very much a reflection of that. And don't forget, we haven't left yet. What we're seeing now, which is getting worse and worse, is before we go. If we go without a deal, there will be total chaos and confusion.
Why would there be?
Because we're seeing it already.
No, we're not.
Because I think later in the programme we're going to be talking about stockpiling medicines, just to quote one example.
I think there's a lot of that. Indeed, there's a lot of that fear that we're seeing now. You were talking about the Project Fear before, but there's a lot of fear of people now because of all this uncertainty. They don't know how they're supposed to prepare for it. And now we're always hearing, all these negative effects of the Brexit uncertainty in the business community as well. But let's look at this one company, because the Brexit breakdown is very good news for them. Let's take a look.
With
Parliament in deadlock and Leavers and Remainers fighting to shape the UK's future, there's no obvious end in sight. And that's prompted some plucky Brits to prepare for the worst. A UK-based emergency food company has launched a Brexit stockpiling box. Coming in at just under £300 or €340, it ensures a healthy supply of meals including macaroni and cheese, chicken fajita, beef and potato stew and much more. With around 600 packs sold since mid-December and no Brexit breakthrough in sight, could this Brexit kit become a UK bestseller? Is that an overreaction?
Of course. Of course it is.
But Mary, you were bringing up the point of medical supplies.
Mary, have you bought one?
Well, I'm over here a lot of the time, so it doesn't quite apply.
Exactly. It's an overreaction.
No, it's not an overreaction. There are obviously companies...
600 people in a population of 6 million.
There are companies who feel they can make money out of it. These companies would not be putting those sort of things forward for sale if they didn't think they were going to get something out of it. We've seen the National Health Service buying up almost the entire world's stock of fridges so they can put medicines in them so they keep, which is an awful thing to have to do. We've seen cancer treatment.
But Mary, that's just silliness.
Cancer treatment.
The NHS can buy their medicines from America.
It's not.
They can buy their medicines from South Africa, from Israel, from wherever.
Well, you're not ill because if
I'm a diabetic. And,
well, yeah, then you actually know. You actually know.
In the slightest. No, I'm not worried in the slightest.
Well, you're very lucky then. If you're in a position where you're not able to be worried, you're extremely lucky.
I think the point that we're seeing here is
Project Fear.
Either
like the majority
way,
of the British people, we don't fall for it.
Yeah, but either way, we do not know what is about to happen next.
You don't know if you're going to get run over by a bus tomorrow.
Right. Okay, well, we'll leave it at that for now, because we have a lot more Brexit talk coming up on Raw Politics, because crushed by the House of Commons, we head across Europe and get your views on Brexit. Plus, we also have a lot more on what last night's defeat means for Europe. Is it a game changer for Europe's negotiating position? Don't go away.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
Well, that was the moment Theresa May's Brexit deal suffered a crushing defeat in Parliament last night. There's been a lot of reaction from politicians, but what about their constituents? Alex Morgan and our team in the Cube have more on that side of the story. Alex?
Well, Tessa, let's burst the bubble for a minute, shall we? Stepping away. Here at Euronews, of course, we want to bring you all views and all voices. And let me just, obviously I could bring you far more. I've only got a short little bit, but let me just introduce you to four people who've given us their perspectives, four very different perspectives on this. I just want to actually start, if I might, with Carolina here. She's an Italian. She's lived in London for roughly a decade, 26 years old, an academic. And for her, the aftermath of all of this, she feels EU citizens, they're being disrespected. Let's get her perspective.
I just wish I could know what's going to happen, and if I can stay in the country and in the city that I call home, if I can keep working and studying here. I just wish I could know, and I also just wish that the government was more respectful in the way they talked about European immigrants.
The UK government. Well, when it comes to the UK government, we've had a lot of discussion about Theresa May from the politicians, but I think one of the important points in all this is the people who do still stand by Theresa May. You'll remember, of course, this is Martin. We met him before. He backed Theresa May before, and now he still backs her, even after that defeat.
Believe it or not, Theresa May has done a brilliant job with what she was left with. I still believe that we will get a second referendum. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. Remember, people voted us out, so out we should go.
Out we should go. But talk of a second referendum there, and there are some who really want a second referendum. Have a listen to this.
In January they say measure twice, cut once, but we've only measured once in Britain, and we're ready to cut our entire ties with Europe, who we've been with since 1975. The politicians need to hold a second referendum. 2 million of the people who voted Brexit are now dead, and we need a second vote.
So some strong words there. It's Danny, he's 35. He's there referencing joinery, which is where, of course, you have a piece of cloth, you measure it twice before you cut. In his view, that referendum, we've only had one measure. We need to measure again before we make the cut. So interesting perspectives there. But on that topic of a second referendum, it's coming up again and again. There are some people who voted Remain, like Spencer here, who find that idea objectionable. Have a listen in.
I'm seriously concerned about the second referendum campaign, as I do believe it is a Remain campaign that's trying to undo what people already voted for. As for me, I voted Remain in 2016, but we lost, and I believe the will of the people should be respected. You can't ignore 17.4 million people.
Well, that's Spencer's take. Well, we certainly can't ignore these four people. They're just some of the perspectives we're getting in this Tessa. Away from the politicians, some people, EU nationals, British citizens, giving their take. Again, you can see a lot of diverse perspectives here as well.
Thank you for bringing us those voices, Alex, and our team in theCUBE. And Europe's leaders have also been reacting, to yesterday's events at the British Parliament. And the European Parliament here in Strasbourg held a special session on Brexit this morning. Let's take a look.
We regret profoundly this vote, as President Juncker has said, and this regret, ladies and gentlemen, is obviously also linked to the intense work we have done together with you, with your Brexit Steering Group, for 2 years, but also with the British government, based on the red lines of the British government and based on the realities of leaving the EU.
I know, and it's not up to me as a humble Belgian to lecture the Brits on what to do, but I think it's time now to tell our British friends that for the sake of Britain itself, it's time for cross-party cooperation in Britain, as we do here in this Parliament from day one.
And if the betrayal becomes complete, and we are forced to vote in a second referendum, you may be in for a big surprise. The British may be a very placid people, very laid back, but I promise you, if they get pushed too far, it's a lion that will roar. We will be even more defiant if we have to fight a second referendum, and we'll win it by a bigger majority.
The ball is in the field of our British friends, and not so much on the governmental side, mainly on the Parliament side. We have there a camp of hard Brexiteers, we have a camp of those who want to stay in the European Union, we have a camp of Norway Plus, a camp of CETA Plus, whatever. So please, please, please tell us, finally, what do you want to achieve? Give us a clear orientation, and then Europe is ready to conclude the negotiations in a good way.
Right, with me now to discuss this is Irish MEP and European Parliament Vice President Mairead McGuinness, who sits with the EPP group, and we also have a British MEP, Dan Dalton, who sits with the ECR group. Right, Mairead, I'll start with you. You were nodding when you were looking at that video. So what is the general feeling in Europe in reaction to last night?
Okay, I think people were expecting a no vote. No surprise there. The size of it, yes, a big surprise. But the analysis of it is not complete. And I think my problem, and I think that's why people are pleading with the United Kingdom and the Prime Minister to come forward with a solution, is that to satisfy all of those who in a very strange, if you like, coalition voted against this deal would be impossible with one solution. So I don't know whether there will be a number of issues. I think the idea of crossing the benches and talking to other parties in the House of Commons, as the Prime Minister indicated after the vote, is positive. I wish it had happened earlier. I don't know if it will work. You're closer, Dan, to these things to see will that effort to have a House of Commons approach work and give us a majority that sends a signal that we want to get on with Brexit. Because I think, well, you know, there is at heart a sadness about the UK leaving. You know, we're good colleagues, we might differ politically on some things. There's also a respect for the vote. And I think listening to the diverse views of those young people and with mixed opinions is part of the problem, that everyone has an opinion, even politicians. But there at one point has to be a place where we compromise on our views to get a deal.
And Dan, I mean, the sense here is that it seems they're saying the ball is still in the UK's court. Is there anything that the EU can do at this point in time, apart from just waiting?
No, I don't think that. I mean, at the moment, there's clearly no consensus in the Parliament in Westminster. That's clear. The Prime Minister is going to try and reach out across the bench and get a consensus. I think at the moment, it's probably best that the EU just sort of lets the UK get through that process, because at the moment, this is a London issue. I mean, there is a deal on the table that's been agreed from the European side. It's London now that needs to come sort of what consensus it can get to get changes to that deal, what changes can be made here. In my opinion, the EU at the moment is best just waiting to see what
But it seems that the tune has changed, right? It seems like, because before the vote, the EU is saying, well, no renegotiation, none of that's going to happen. But is there a softening?
Oh, I think at this point, no, because honestly, the issue really has to be resolved in the House of Commons, because we can't put forward a solution because we don't know what problem we're trying to solve. I mean, it's very clear from our side that the withdrawal agreement had three components. They're equally important: citizens, money, and the Irish question. In addition to that, and perhaps not enough focus has been given to the political declaration on the future relationship, because I think therein lies the solution here. And I think we also need to trust each other a little more, because there is a sense from some UK colleagues that we want to trap the United Kingdom and the European Union. We don't, because it would be really not good for either party, and it would be pointless. So I think, you know, we, as honest brokers and negotiators, we have to accept what's on the table now, hear back from the Prime Minister, possibly Monday, I think, Dan, she'll come back with some statement, perhaps not a definitive one, and then let us see from there. But I think the other issue, and you probably mentioned it, is this big enormous clock that ticks towards the end of March, and whether we can do all of what we need to do, both legally and technically, to get this over the line, even if there were not these difficulties in the House of Commons. I think that's still an open question.
And Michel Barnier seems to be raised the prospect of a no-deal Brexit. He says it's much higher now. Do you agree with that? Because the markets don't seem to think that that's...
I mean, the no-deal Brexit is the status quo. If nothing changes between now and the 29th of March, then the UK will leave without a deal. So something will need to change to avoid that situation. So he's right to...
Can either of the three that Mairead mentioned move?
In my opinion, I believe there will be some movement from London in terms of coming forward with some new proposals that will need to be negotiated again. But time is clearly very, very short. We've got 10 weeks. We've got some more bills that need to go through the Parliament in Westminster to get Brexit over the line anyway. So we really are in the last stage saloon, if you like.
Yeah, and just on that idea of the no deal, it's been quite interesting. Obviously, the European Union has to prepare for that possibility, and I think people were surprised that the preparations are being made, but I think it would be foolhardy for us not to do it, both collectively and at member state level. But these are the sort of plans we never want to actually see materialise. And in a way, that's exactly what the backstop around the Irish question is. It's a plan there to avoid a problem, and we can avoid that problem by negotiating sensibly on the future.
But the problem with the backstop, and this is actually a negotiating success from the Prime Minister, to move the backstop from a Northern Ireland-only backstop to a UK-wide backstop, customs union, effectively. The problem with that is, given the fact that to leave the backstop, the UK can't do it unilaterally. So it can leave the UK unilaterally, the EU unilaterally, but it can't leave the customs union unilaterally. Given the fact that the customs union is such a difficult relationship, you look at Turkey, there's a big fear in the UK that the UK could get stuck in a customs union with no way out of it.
Yeah,
we're running out of time, so I'll give you last point.
But don't let's say that Ireland is the problem, because there are many other problems. Many MPs voted no to remain in the European Union in the hope of a second referendum. So I think we're still in the analysis phase.
In fact, we are going to talk a lot more about Ireland when we come back after the programme, because after the break and down to the deadline with all this Brexit chaos, what could it mean for European elections? And we talk to MEPs here in Strasbourg as well. All that coming up. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, the countdown is across Europe. No, not to Brexit. In fact, to the European elections. But judging from everyone's preoccupation these days, you would hardly know it, because they are all talking about Brexit. And for more on how one might affect the other, I'm joined by our correspondent, Maeve McMahon. Maeve, you know, you've been talking to a lot of people here in Strasbourg. What is their biggest worry right now?
Well, absolutely, because the 29th of March is not the only date that EU lawmakers here in Strasbourg are keeping an eye on in 2019, but also European elections, transnational elections taking place on the 23rd to the 26th of May. Now I've got my hands here on the press kit, and there's no mention of the United Kingdom there. Their 73 seats have already been redistributed. But with all this uncertainty now and talk about a possible extension of Article 50, I've been asking MEPs here today in Strasbourg if they're worried that internal domestic affairs over in the United Kingdom might overshadow these upcoming European elections.
We don't want that the mess in British politics is imported in European politics, and that's the reason why I think that if the UK asks for a prolongation of the period under Article 50, so to prolong that period, that is possible for a few weeks, but not beyond the European election, because otherwise this uncertainty will continue.
It's a chaos now. Because we don't know exactly what the parties want.
The further east you go in the European Union, just generally speaking, the less of an issue it'll become. But if you're in the Netherlands, for instance, exporting a large amount of fruit and veg to the UK, then it's going to be a big election issue. So I think it'll come down to what extent you trade with the UK, and the more you trade, then the more an issue it's going to be. The less you trade, the less an issue.
Now, of course, I think it will have an influence, but it will not overshadow the European election.
The only way to avoid the hard Brexit, and we should avoid that leads to chaos, is to postpone that, and then we would have immediate implication on the European election. And yes, it is an election topic because it shows that nationalists and populists don't lead to more sovereignty, they lead to chaos.
We have 6 mandates in the European Parliament, and we were supposed to get 7th. And now, obviously, it will not happen, which makes us sad. But of course, you're right. Yes, I believe it will kind of. We will see growth of Euroscepticism, definitely.
So you're hoping that they will have another vote and stay and then participate in these elections?
Yes.
But time is getting tight. No, it's like.
Yes, but we can find time for democracy.
There you go, a mixed bag of reactions there from members of the European Parliament, with some of them even secretly hoping that Brexit won't happen at all.
All right, thank you for that, Maeve McMahon, our correspondent. And joining me now in the studio to discuss this is Danish MEP Jeppe Kofod, who is vice chair with the SND group. We also have Tony Connolly, who is the Europe editor of the Irish broadcaster RTE. All right, I'll start with you, Jeppe. What is your fear about Brexit? Do you think it will overshadow other important issues at the European elections?
It will be a big factor if the UK doesn't resolve the internal crisis before May, and therefore, of course, it will have an impact. I mean, what happened so far is that the EU member states, we come together and say, okay, some of us has troubles with EU policies, but better stay in EU and reform it and change it from inside, take the debate inside, than try to leave it in a chaotic way like we see in the UK. So I think it's in a way vaccinating countries from leaving the Union.
Well, that's one point. But another point raised is it could be exploited to further maybe more populist or nationalist agenda. So which is it? Is it like a vaccine to stop people from leaving, or would it actually push people on the edges?
I think it depends on which country you're talking about. I think certainly in France, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, is anxious about the Brexit debate leaking into the French debate for the European elections, because one could imagine that Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far right in France, could use that as a battering ram. Look, Britain tried to leave, Brussels has presented it leaving, the voice of the people and so on. So I think they will want to try and limit the impact of Brexit on these elections. But of course, if there is an extension to Article 50, then of course that opens up all sorts of very complicated legal questions about whether you could have a properly constituted European Parliament beyond the 2nd of July if British MEPs are not represented. So the question then would be, do they take part in elections in May, or do they perhaps even take part in elections later on separately? So there are all sorts of minefields.
Yes, so with all these minefields, as you call them, how is the EU supposed to prepare for this?
Well, I think it's very difficult, but I mean, my personal opinion is that if the UK needs a little bit more time to resolve its internal crisis, it's okay with me. Although I think it's the last shot, because first you had David Cameron making a deal that was rejected and led to leave, and then you had Theresa May negotiating for almost 2 years, saying yes to a deal, and now it's been rejected by the British Parliament. So third time it should be something which gives certainty whether UK will ask the people again about whether Brexit should stay or they should take a new decision. That type of things. We need some kind of certainty, but we should give the UK a little bit more time, I think.
But I was reading, like some MEPs were saying that it's already taken up so much of their time in the past almost 2 years. All right. Well, we talked to former Green Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis. He wants to be an MEP, and he was in Strasbourg today, drumming up support for his EU election campaign bid, and he was talking about Brexit. What else? Let's take a look.
I think that what Parliament did last night was a vindication of democracy. I think that they need to be commended for having stood up to a silly deal, a deal that could not work and would not be good either for Britain or for the European Union, and to resist the pressures created by a fake deadline. Let's think about it. On the 29th of March, supposedly Armageddon comes. Why? We decided collectively as Europeans that this Article 50 process must have a hard barrier. It shouldn't. What could happen, for instance, is if when Article 50 expires, the European Commission could easily use its emergency powers to say business as usual. We renew, we keep rolling over the present circumstances for 6 months every time while the proper negotiations take place.
He seems really calm about what is about to come next. What do you think? Extension of Article 50, what Yanis Varoufakis was saying, there's nothing to worry about, in fact.
Well, I think the EU has been fairly clear from day one that this process is guided and governed by the treaties and Article 50. So that is the reason you have this hard deadline, as he talks about. I think you're talking about either a safe extension, which is perhaps up to the beginning of July. But if they need longer than that, and it seems from the lack of unity or agreement or consensus in the House of Commons that they probably will need longer than that, then you're going to get into a problem. Another political dilemma, I think, is that if you've 73 British MEPs who are going to now come back into the fold in Strasbourg and Brussels, that will upset the balance because none of those MEPs will be going into the European People's Party, the biggest party. So you can see a political resistance as well to this particular issue. I think.
Yeah, but that I think we should avoid. I mean, we shouldn't have this type of political, tactical thinking into it. I think we should try to find a solution that will diminish the problems for the UK and also Europe.
I mean, you should avoid the problem of MEPs and what to do.
Because I understand that some groups think it's problematic for political reasons.
Like the Irish, I think.
Yeah. Well, the problem for Ireland is that because Britain has left or is expected to leave, Ireland got 2 extra MEP seats. So those seats would then have to be taken away and given back to British MEPs.
So you think this is a bit of a distraction in talking about?
Yeah, I mean, in Denmark we got 1 more seat going from 13 to 14. But I think the most important right now is to give them probably a little bit more time. And I mean, when the Parliament in the UK and the government can't solve it, I think under normal circumstances you need to ask the people what they think should happen. I mean, I'm coming from a country where we had a referendum in '92. We rejected the Maastricht Treaty. And we came together in a kind of a national compromise. And then we asked the population, and they said yes to the Edinburgh Agreement. Right. And now we are still part of the EU. But we need some kind of clarity. And I think my personal view would be that they should ask the British people again.
That sounded so much simpler than what's happening in the UK right now. All right, well, as the UK and Europe continue to grapple with Brexit, one man is on a mission to turn a broken relationship into something beautiful. Let's take a look.
I like cheese and wine.
This is Matthew Herbert and his Brexit big band. He's been dancing his way across Europe on an apology tour, taking messages from the UK to Europe and back through music and paper planes. With people jumping on board every step of the way, the British musician wants to show that in times of uncertainty and confusion, there's also tolerance and creativity. The band was founded when Article 50 was triggered and will release its new album on the date the UK will officially leave the Union. Made up of sounds from across Great Britain, he's had enough of the infighting in his country. Ultimately, he says, we have more in common than what divides us.
All right, still to come on Raw Politics, the political fight of her life. We head to London for the latest on tonight's no confidence vote on Theresa May. Plus, everything you need to know to watch it like a pro. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, just over 1 hour, we should know the result of the no-confidence vote in Theresa May's government. Well, let's pause first and delve into the world of Westminster to find out exactly how this process works. Let's take a look.
Welcome to the Commons, the lower house of Britain's parliament, where prime ministers and opposition leaders have locked horns for centuries.
Of all the people, we spent several hours.
It's breach of UN resolutions.
And where tonight, Theresa May will face the battle of her political career as she gets to her feet here at the dispatch box to fend off a no-confidence motion. So how exactly does it work? Well, under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, British general elections take place every 5 years. The next one is set for 2022. To force one earlier, opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn has to table a motion of no confidence, as he did yesterday.
I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government.
He and Prime Minister Theresa May are then given time in Parliament to debate the motion. At the end of the session, Speaker John Bercow will yell, "Division!" And MPs will head through the lobbies to vote. If Theresa May's government wins at least 318 votes, there will be no general election and she can carry on. But if she loses, then Britain could be heading back to the polls. There's just one catch. A 14-day countdown clock starts ticking down, giving the government or any alternative government the chance to gain the confidence of the House. If a stable government is not formed by the deadline, then it's up to the people to decide.
All right, for more on what to expect tonight, let's cross to London. Our correspondent Darren McCaffrey is there. Darren?
Hello, Tessa. It's a rather miserable evening here in Westminster, and it's been a rather miserable 24 hours for Theresa May, having been royally defeated last night. She is potentially going to win, or we think she's going to win this confidence vote tonight, but our problems have not gone away, not least of all what to do next on Brexit. So let's bring in one of our MPs, Nigel Evans. He is a Conservative. He's a Brexiteer, someone who I think voted against Theresa May's deal last night.
I did her a favour, because if that treaty had gone through last night, we would have lost the support of the 10 DUP, and without them we can't govern. So there's no way that treaty should have gone through last night.
So what happens next? She's going to talk to other parties. I mean, are we now looking essentially at a softer form of Brexit, because that's the only thing that will get through Parliament?
Well, we'll see. What she needs to do, and she is talking, as you say, to a number of politicians. I saw Arlene Foster, the leader of the DUP, over at the House of Commons about an hour ago, and the Prime Minister now, when she says she's reaching out, she mentions the DUP first. She's actually recognised that they are the umbilical cord that allows us to govern, and we almost cut it last night. Thanks to 118 Tory MPs, it wasn't going to happen. So she needs to reach out, absolutely, but she also needs to go back to the European Union and say to them that things like the backstop, for instance, is an absolute no-goer. If the DUP will not accept it, we just simply won't get that through Parliament.
But we've got cabinet ministers today suggesting actually the way out of this is that the customs union needs to stay on the table. That's what the Labour Party are proposing. We know that could get through Parliament. Yeah. Would you like to see the UK stay inside the EU's customs union?
No, we can't, because part of the campaign, which 17.4 million people voted for, was that we leave the customs union and the single market. You need to leave the customs union in order to control immigration, which we want to do, control our borders, and also to be able to do trade deals throughout the whole of the world. So there are red lines that have to be put in, and as far as I'm concerned, Theresa next week must bring forward something, irrespective of whether the European Union initially agree with it or not, something that says this is where we want to go. There are some people over there, who want to reverse Brexit. I know that. We've got a parliament that's three-quarter Remain.
But we know, and finally on this, we know what people don't want. The question is, what do you want? What do Tory MPs want? What is going to happen?
Well, we've got to deliver for the 17.4 million people. We've got to leave the European Union. 75% of Conservative constituencies voted leave. 61% of Labour constituencies voted leave. And so, well, I would prefer a deal. So let's go back to the European Union. And when they say, oh no, we're not going to renegotiate, well, it's them. It's up to them to say what they want. Because, quite frankly, Theresa's got a big dilemma over there. She's got to get something through that is going to be acceptable to everybody, which also actually holds true to the referendum result. That's going to be difficult.
the EU need to come to the table.
Indeed, there you go. There's a message from one Conservative MP, Nigel Evans. Thank you very much indeed. The EU need to come to the table. Well, let's just very briefly focus on the vote tonight. We're expecting around 8 p.m. your time, Tessa. As I said, the expectation she will survive. What happens next, though, well, as has been proven, entirely unpredictable.
Oh, indeed, Darren. Thank you for that, Darren McCaffrey. And joining me now in the studio to discuss this is Swedish MEP Christopher Fjellner from the EPP Group and Alan Smith, the Scottish MEP who sits with the Greens EFA Group. Well, I'll start with you, Alan. You were watching with interest.
Okay. Interest's a good word.
With interest, yeah. Yes. What are you expecting? What are you looking out for tonight?
Well, it seems pretty clear that Mrs May is going to win the vote of no confidence. It seems to me a pretty spectacular misjudgment on the part of Jeremy Corbyn that he seems to think this is somehow an answer or something useful to do. It really isn't. It's a distraction. This is just showbiz for ugly people nonsense that I really think we could do without. Now, my guys, we're the third biggest bloc at Westminster, much as we want an independent Scotland within the European Union. We have no confidence in this government, but we do need to get this done because we need to look for serious solutions, and this isn't it. There are solutions that could be found. They are not going to be found by your previous interview either, mixing arrogance and ignorance in equal measure. The world does not revolve around Westminster, and the EU certainly does not, as we've seen in the 2-year process that the Tories have wasted so much time.
Christopher, we heard there Nigel Evans saying that, in fact, it's the EU that needs to say what it wants. But the frustration here is that the EU has said that, well, we actually don't know what the British want, what the UK wants.
That's probably the biggest difference. I've done trade policy for 15 years there, and if one thing that's clear in all negotiations is that you need two things. You need a clear mandate, know what you want, and secondly, you need a big political backing. I would say in the European Union, the mandate is extremely clear. It's the European legislation. It's their key. We've compromised every single comma, and the political backing is nobody questions our mandate. So the challenge we have right now, I think, from the European Union side is that we're suffering from a weak counterpart, and it's tough to negotiate with a weak counterpart.
Okay, we're running out of time, but very briefly, if they go back to the table, if the EU goes back to the table, do you think there is movement on any of the important issues, especially the Irish backstop?
No, the Irish backstop's the one thing that must remain fixed. The Good Friday Agreement is an international treaty between Ireland and the UK. It's a peace process that is still fragile. Now, I'm from Glasgow in Scotland, which is close by to Belfast, Northern Ireland. We must preserve the peace process, and I absolutely support the backstop and the EU position on that.
I'm seeing some reports saying that there is a possibility, although...
No.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Okay.
One can, of course, have time to negotiate, and I think the European Union should use that time. But fundamentally, Ireland needs to agree on this. If Ireland isn't on board, then it will be nothing. And without the backstop, Ireland will leave the table.
Indeed. The question is if Ireland will agree, and clearly you're saying they won't. All right. Time now for tonight's One Moment Before We Go. It features Emmanuel Macron's fiery response to the Brexit developments in London. Let's take a look.
Première option, ils vont vers le no deal. Donc ils disent il n'y a pas d'accord. Ça fait peur à tout le monde. Les premiers perdants de ça, ce sont les Britanniques. Deuxième option, ils nous disent on va essayer, à mon avis c'est ce qu'ils vont faire, je les connais un peu, on va essayer d'améliorer ce qu'on peut obtenir des Européens et on va revenir faire le vote. Là on regardera, c'est qu'ils vont dire au fond on va prendre plus de temps. Et donc ils vont demander d'avoir un plus grand délai pour renégocier quelque chose. C'est un référendum qui a été manipulé de l'extérieur par beaucoup de ce qu'on appelle les infox aujourd'hui, où on a dit tout et n'importe quoi, puis après on a dit non, débrouillez-vous. Et puis dans des courses, c'est pas vrai. On a menti aux gens, et ce qu'ils ont choisi, c'est pas possible.
Does that reaction encapsulate pretty much what everyone here is thinking, or majority? I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. There's consternation that there was a great deal of trust in Theresa May personally as the democratically elected Prime Minister, that she could deliver a majority. She was speaking on behalf of the UK. Now, the UK is a united kingdom in name, but it's certainly not united in reality. Scotland voted to remain. Northern Ireland has a very complicated position. Mrs May's credibility has been damaged beyond repair by this.
Christopher?
It's the weakness of a referendum as such. You know, a referendum, you can say yes or no, I want to leave, but it's a divorce, but nobody's moving. We'll have 32 kilometers between Dover and Calais, and the big problem is it doesn't say anything about the future. And the future is what I think everybody is fighting about right now in Westminster.
Oh, the future, indeed, because very soon we'll find out what happens with Theresa May in that no confidence vote. All right, thank you for joining us tonight. We always like to hear what you think, so do get in touch with me. I'm on Twitter at Tessa Ercilia, or use at Euronews and use the hashtag #RawPolitics. Thank you for watching, and join us again tomorrow.